Spring practice is getting closer for the Louisville football program. We'll talk about the key players to watch heading into the spring on this episode of the Louisville Podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by RunYourPool. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. As always, I serve as a credentialed media member for Cardinal Sports Zone, and I also do some PA work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week. Your team every day. We'll start out today's episode talking about the key players to watch for both offense and defense ahead of the Louisville football spring practice commencement starting on Monday, February 28th. We'll then dive into the women's basketball preview for the matchup against Pittsburgh this evening. And then finally, without further ado, we will hop into the weekly mailbag segment. Starting off with spring practice for football starting on Monday. For yesterday's episode, if you haven't checked it out, go check that out now. We talked about some of the biggest questions heading into spring practice. I wanted to take this time to transition a little bit, and shift gears and talk about the players to watch for both the offense and defense. Look, I get it. You're not going to learn too much about the depth chart and stuff like that, through spring practice. Spring practice is something to where you may see some guys, show out in the weight room, show out in some individual workouts, some other team drills and stuff like that. But I don't think you're going to get a huge grasp on where things are at until, you get into the summer workouts and practices and then into fall camp when you start to see that depth chart finalized. But I want to mention a couple of players that I'm looking forward to seeing how they fare in the spring. Number one, it starts with 2022 quarterback Khalib Johnson, who is an early enrollee. He is part of the Cardinal program now. He obviously, Malik Cunningham is the starter for 2022. That should shock no one. But the backup position is up for grabs. And if we've seen anything throughout the past couple of years, is that when Malik Cunningham goes down, well, the Cardinals have struggled to be able to, replace and replicate some of the production that, you on the field. So, there's a lot of questions surrounding the backup quarterback position. I'm interested to see how Johnson does. Johnson, a guy that's come from Alabama, like Malik, tore it up in the state in terms of high school ball. I'm very interested to see how he comes in and looks in terms of, being able to, read the defense, learn the playbook, etc. You have to talk about that when you talk about newcomers, just getting familiar with ways, internalizing the scheme and stuff like that. I'm interested to see how he fares. A newcomer that I'm looking forward to, seeing what they do in spring workouts, that is Tyler Hudson, the FCS transfer. I am, I'm not necessarily going to say on the fence because I think he's going to have a successful season next year. I wonder what that looks like for Louisville. Tyler Hudson is a guy that when the Cards took him, obviously when you think of, going FCS to high Division I, you're like, well, is it really going to be one of those things to, it's going to work out? Well, Tyler Hudson, has, had a wonderful career, at Central Arkansas when he was there. He's been a guy that has, showed out for the Bears, 6'2", 195. Could be the guy that, replaces Justin Marshall in this overall setting. Through the season last year, receptions, 1,242 yards, 8 touchdowns, had a long of 93. So, very, very solid overall all season long. He's one of the guys, him, I guess you could say D. Wiggins as well, to where you're looking and you're thinking, okay, those are two guys you kind of have circled as you head into spring ball and see how, they work with with the new coaching hires and stuff like that, and with guys like Amari Huggins, Bruce, Tyler Harrell, Josh Johnson, etc. There are some snaps, and targets to be passed around in the wide receiving room. We'll see who is able to rise to the occasion. Kind of going a little bit more into the defensive side of things. I guess you could say Taion Evans in the running back committee, and just kind of seeing how things go with that, that depth chart battle. It's probably going to be one of the biggest question marks heading into the 2022 campaign. Is just what does the running back depth chart look like? But in terms of defensively speaking, I'm interested to see the defensive line, more specifically defensive tackle. I want to know. I want to see what Caleb Banks brings to the table, for spring practice. You also talk about guys like Des Tell, Henry Bryant. The list goes on. R.J. Sorensen. So really, I guess you could circle the whole interior defensive line aspect of this, because I think that that's one of the biggest question marks heading into the season for the defense is what is that depth chart going to look like at defensive tackle. If the Cardinals did need to address any positional need, at the end of spring ball, probably defensive tackles, one of those, very high up on the priority list. Scott Satterfield saying in the National Signing Day press conference that the Cardinals may not necessarily be done adding to the team for next season. Obviously, more and more guys will enter the transfer portal after spring ball, so that's something to look forward to. I'm also interested in, we talked about some newcomers. Momo Sanogo, the Mississippi transfer at linebacker, seemingly going to step in for C.J. Avery in that outside linebacker role. Had a solid career at Mississippi, saw more action earlier on in his career, but overall, a solid addition to the linebacking committee. You already have Monty Montgomery, who will not necessarily be partaking in spring ball. He's back for 2022 as a starter. Yasir Abdullah as well. I'm interested to see how he is going to, do an individual workouts, team drills, stuff like that. The last player that I'm interested to see how they do, and this is kind of one of those to where I went back and forth on whether I should go with this guy or another guy in the position, but I'm actually just probably going to group them together. It seems like the transfers and the incoming freshmen are, the guys that I'm focusing on the most. That is, Jalen Alexander, Jaden Williams. How are they going to fare in the Cardinal defensive backfield? Does Scott Satterfield, Wesley McGriff, and Brian Brown view them as cornerbacks, or are they going to see some time at safety? I know that versatility is one of those. It's the name of the game for the the secondary for the Cardinals. So, all across the board, the newcomers are pretty much the guys that I'm looking to focus on, because the Cardinal program is bringing back a lot of continuity in terms of the roster for the 2022 season. So there are going to be a good amount of starters back. It really is just going to depend on what the newcomers bring to the table. So we'll continue to talk about spring practice as we get more tidbits. As mentioned, the first practice begins February 28th, which is Monday. There will be 15 practices before and after spring break leading up to the spring game in early April. So I want to take this time now to transition over into the women's basketball side of things, where the Cardinals will go on the road and play the Pittsburgh Panthers on Thursday evening. We'll talk about that preview here in just a second after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, Run Your Pool. March Madness is only a couple weeks away. That means you need to start thinking now about where you're going to be running your brackets this year. Are you going for the usual, or are you looking for the best? We've done our homework here, and we're running brackets with RunYourPool.com. Along with standard brackets, Run Your Pool offers game types like Survivor or Pick X. Both are really fun in their own way. They have options to edit scoring, and they offer more intel to make your picks. All stuff you won't find at ESPN or CBS. If you've got a business, Run Your Pool can help you take some of that madness magic and play alongside your employees or even gain customers. Plus, they offer full white glove customer support, custom branding, and one of the easiest 3-minute setups you will ever find. Clearly, we believe Run Your Pool because, like I said, we're running our brackets there ourselves. There's no truer test than that. If you want to play against us for a shot at a cash prize, join us at runyourpool.com/lockedon. And while you're there, create your own pool for your friends and family. Enter Pure Madness at checkout for $10 off your custom pool. All the rules and details will be available there. That's runyourpool.com/lockedon for your chance to win a cash prize. We look forward to seeing and meeting you there. As always, I wanted to say thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week. Your team every day. The Cardinals entering the home stretch of the 2022 season. 2 more games left on the docket before postseason play begins next at Pittsburgh tonight, at Notre Dame on Sunday. We'll talk about the first of the 2 final matches. That is with the Pittsburgh Panthers. The Panthers 11-16 overall. Yeah, 16. I can't read today. 2 in conference. Pittsburgh has lost their last 7 games. Their last victory coming in late January against Clemson. I believe it was in overtime, but ultimately Pittsburgh is at a risk of not winning a single game in the calendar month of February. The team trending in the wrong direction. We brought up a preview for the, I think it was for the, was it your Notre Dame or North Carolina? It's from Data Scribe on the ESPN website, and it's some great previews. I want to start out talking about this matchup by what is being said on this, and I quote: Pittsburgh enters the game averaging 62.7 points per game, 8.2 more than the 54.5 Louisville surrenders per contest. They're 10-6 in games where they put up more than 54 points. The Panthers have found success crashing the offensive glass this season, averaging 15.4 a game. The mark is good for first in the ACC and 16th in the country. While Louisville leads, will look into the matchup with a 72.4 points per game average on the season, 6.9 more than the 65.5 Pittsburgh allows. The Cardinals are 22-1 in games when they score at least 66 points and have shot a higher percentage from the field than their competition this season, making 45.7% goals while limiting opponents to just under 37% when Louisville eclipses average. The Cardinals are 12-0 in the 21-22 campaign. If you remember, there was a decent little snowstorm when the Panthers traveled to the KFC Yum Center early on in I think it was January 6th. It was a huge victory for the Cardinals. In fact, I mean, it was a blowout from seemingly the very beginning, 1-39 at the KFC Yum Center back on January 6th. The team forced 35 turnovers from the Pittsburgh Panthers, and that was actually incredible. Pittsburgh was 2-9 from the three-point line, 22.2%, and shot the ball overall 25.9 from the field. So the Cardinals really handled Pittsburgh. The Panthers did not score over 15 in a quarter. Jada Everett, she only played 7 minutes in that contest. She leads the team in double-digit scoring. She shoots the ball pretty well from behind the arc. That's probably the player to watch for Pittsburgh. For Louisville, Emily Ingsler had 12, 10, and 7 last time around, with Pittsburgh being a turnover-prone basketball team. I see Ingsler as being the player to watch for Louisville just because of her tenacity on the defensive end. I think brings to the table could turn this into another blowout from the offensive side of things. So overall, this is a game to where, yes, it's on the road. Anytime you go on the road, it's going to be a little bit tougher than playing at home, obviously. But with the the direction that Pittsburgh is going in and stuff like that, it's really hard not to predict another blow, especially when the first matchup was extremely lopsided. Probably one of the most lopsided Power 5 games that the Cardinals have had this season. I mean, 81-39. You forced 35 turnovers. They shot the ball under 26% from the field and from the three-point line. And I get it, when it rains, it pours sometimes, when you're not able to get into a groove, it's, it kind of, puts you out of the game early. But Pittsburgh just not necessarily clicking at the right time. They have not won a single game in the month of February, like I mentioned. Overall, this is one of the games to where I'm not going to say it's a trap game, but I mean, in essence, it is. Any game's a trap game if you want to play the technical, side of things. But I think that this is more an opportunity for players like Alana Smith, Peyton Verhulst, moving on down the line, Liz Dixon to even get some more minutes. Mikasa Robinson playing, a good amount of minutes. This is an opportunity for get their rotational players some good PT and getting them, trying to, get some, a boost of confidence, so to speak, ahead of their matchup at the very end of the regular season at Notre Dame in South Bend, which is going to be a tough matchup. And obviously on the show, we will that matchup on tomorrow's episode. But overall, I think that this is going to be to where we're going to see the Cardinals look to try to get out in transition, creating and forcing turnovers. I look for Louisville, the keys to the game. Obviously, it's kind of what it was last time, make life miserable for the Pittsburgh Panthers on the offensive side of the of the floor. Force turnovers, force them into highly contested shots. Go back and just look at what we saw that game. Another aspect that I think would be big is I'd like to see, with Pittsburgh being a solid offensive rebounding team. In the first matchup, the teams both had 43 total rebounds. That's another thing that I think needs to happen again, or even improve on, to where Louisville needs to at least tie Pittsburgh in rebounding. I think that if Pittsburgh is to have a chance in this one, it's because they have multiple second chance points. And Louisville is extremely cold from the field. Overall, I'm prediction wise, you're probably looking at about maybe let's go 75 to 52. Just kind of throwing that out there. I think it's going to be a comfortable win for the Cardinals. I'm not sure if it's going to be 81 to 39 in that dynamic, but I do think that the Cards win big. I think that you see players like Emily Ingsler, Haley Van Lith have big games, and also some role players like Peyton Verhulst, who might not necessarily score a lot in previous games, but she definitely could be in double figures in this one. The final segment of the show will be dedicated to the Monday mailbag, the weekly mailbag. I try to incorporate it at the beginning of the week, but there was a lot of stuff to talk about on the Monday episode. We kind of continued to push it back, but we're going to fully conduct one here in just a minute after we talk about our friends over at BetOnline. Look, BetOnline, with BetOnline, football might be over for the season, but basketball's in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fire coach is going to land, it remains the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season, and it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline is where the game starts. Before we get into the mailbag, I do want to remind you all, whether you're watching this on YouTube, obviously if you're watching it on YouTube, you found it on the new YouTube page. If you're listening, in audio only, just a reminder that there is a new Locked On Louisville YouTube page. I appreciate everyone for the the views and the subscriptions to the first page. There was a mishap on just my end in terms of getting it squared away with Locked On. There's a new YouTube account. It has 13 subscribers so far, so be sure to click the subscribe button. Like, share, rate the podcast. I definitely appreciate those sharing it on all podcast streaming platforms. So be sure to check that out. But without further ado, let's get into the mailbag. There's a couple questions I want to focus on, spanning from football over into basketball. Starting out with football, the question is, it has been rumored that the months of March and April are going to be big for the Louisville football program in terms of recruiting. Could you shed some lighting on that? Well, I will say this. If you're looking for me to talk about possible names that could commit, that's really just not my speed, at least not anymore. I apologize on that front. That's probably going to have a lot of people go, man, what are you doing? Do you even know anything? I do. I will tell you that the program is going to be very busy in the month of March and the month of April, and for the spring game and stuff like that. There's going to be some big time visitors over the next 2 months, especially when Pierce Clarkson comes back into town. You talk about Madden Sanker, big 4-star offensive lineman. Ennis, a top 10 player in the country out from California, one of the best wide receivers in the country, actually the number one wide receiver in the country. So just getting these guys on visits is big. Are we going to see a stretch where you see 7 commits in, a handful of days? That's a tough run to top. That's a tough run to replicate. I'm not sure if it's going to be that exciting, but I do think that there are going to be multiple commits here in the next couple months. With the 2023 class is ramping up. You're going to see some notable standouts join the Flyville 23 class. So be patient. It's coming. There's going to be some good news on the horizon. I can tell you that right now. I can't really go into any specifics. Unfortunately, I apologize. I'm not going to ruin the kids' commitments, or I'm going to give them their, they've worked for this. I'm going to give them their spotlight, and like I said, just not my speed to ruin decisions or anything like that. The next question is in the men's basketball realm. It is there a realistic chance that Louisville can make a run and be a Cinderella that makes the NCAA tournament on an automatic bid? I'd love to say yes. It's very unlikely. You're going to have to basically, with the way the cards are now, I think they're the 10th seed currently. So you'd have to win like 5 games in a row in 5 straight days to be able to make the NCAA tournament. I think that the first game would be with like Georgia Tech or something like that. And if you win that game, I think it's I'm not even sure who it would be after that. But I mean, there's outside of maybe Boston College, maybe Clemson. I mean, Louisville's a team that it's hard to take any positives away from the ACC slate so far. So I'm not necessarily sure that there's a great. I mean, obviously there's not a great chance. I don't really know why this answer is being drug out. It would be wishful thinking that they could put it together, try to make things interesting. Any team can do it, but ultimately at the end of the day, the odds aren't necessarily in Louisville's favor. So we'll keep an eye out. Hopefully Louisville gets a decent seeding and a pairing, and maybe who knows, at the end of the day they may be able to make the quarterfinals or just try to do what they can. So ultimately it's just going to be tough to see them really doing all that much. So the third question comes back to the football side of things. What does your gut tell you about the running back committee, and what do you think will be the depth chart for this season? That's tough. Like I said, I think by committee, like it was last year, even though a certain player might start, and another guy might get more snaps, more touches. I think that Taion Evans and Travion Cooley are going to kind of be like a 1A, 1B for the Louisville backfield, with Jalen Mitchell being right there in terms of touches. Jawar Jordan I look at as a possible change of pace third down back, a pass catching back, definitely playing a role on special teams as well. Ultimately, I think that this is probably a race with Evans and Cooley, but don't count out Jalen Mitchell at all. That's why it's really kind of hard to decide. I mean, write down a number 1 through 3, close your eyes, and and pick one of those numbers. And I think that's kind of how the prediction works. Is it's kind of just like throwing a dart at a board and hoping that you're right. But ultimately, it's going to be a very interesting depth chart battle as we go through spring, through the summer, and into the fall camp. But that's going to wrap up this Thursday edition of the show. A couple quick shout-outs before we get out of here. First, the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast. You can check out the most recent episode at cardinalsportszone.com. As always, I want to thank you for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Tomorrow will be a recap of the women's basketball game. We will preview the Notre Dame matchup along with talking the men's basketball matchup. Now, make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. That's going to do it for this Thursday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.